Hi everyone, this is Sachin Sharma from Search and Sachin Astrology. I hope everyone is doing good. And today we're going to discuss Rahu with the Saptagrahas. What we will learn, the ways of Rahu, the ways of the Saptagrahas, Rahu with the Saptagrahas. So I've decided to divide the presentation in these three sections. So starting with the ways of Rahu. In yet another way, the trials and tribulations that make us evolve or devolve arise due to the confusion caused by the entanglement of the soul by the disillusioned manas, which is rooted in ahamkara, self-importance. This confusion causing entanglement has 2 points, Rahu and Ketu. Ketu and Rahu. So let's break it down for a second. So this is yet another way to explain what? To explain the trials and tribulations that make us what? Evolve or devolve. How? How does this happen? It happens due to the confusion that is caused when the soul is entangled with a disillusioned manas. What is a disillusioned manas? A disillusioned manas is a manas that is not aware of itself, that is still rooted in self-importance, ahamkara, which doesn't really understand or has experienced itself as a soul, or being seen its own light as actually the light of the soul being reflected through it, right? So it's disillusioned. And what is this function? What is this? Where is this disillusion coming from? It is basically this moon and sun, the soul, Surya and Chandra, soul and manas, getting entangled at the 2 points that we had discussed in the first video, on the 2 points called Rahu and Ketu. So Rahu is a need for expansion of the soul itself. In the final analysis, none of it is separate from the self. In the current perspective, it is. And they're both true simultaneously. So in this way, Rahu is not only a part, Rahu is also only a part of the self system, the soul system or solar system that we are. Within the self system, Rahu represents the need for the outward expansion into that which we have not experienced, that which seeks evolution and development. So soul is essentially entangled with manas to give birth to Rahu and Ketu, and it's a very important function. It's not just an entanglement in the negative sense. The sun requires moon to be to manifest on earth, and the moon requires the sun to have a source of light, to have a consciousness to experience the material realm that we are in, right? But Rahu and Ketu is where this entanglement points are birthed, and we discussed this, as I'll repeat, in the first video, so please watch that if you haven't. So here it says Rahu is the need for expansion of the soul. So Rahu represents, like, in the sun system, if Mercury represents our capacity, our cognitive abilities, our capacity to communicate and stuff, Rahu is the need, the urge, the desire to expand outwardly, or even if it is inwardly, to something beyond, right? So delete Rahu from the metaphysical law as revealed by astrology, and one will only remain with the familiar in a state of repetitive constancy and madness, right? So Rahu, instead of creating a cyclical, maddening, repetitive loop, Rahu creates a spiralic sort of ever evolving fractal, right? So it moves upwards or it devolves, it moves downwards, but it doesn't stay the same, and thus the universe remains creative, and then in certain sense there is some kind of free will that exists so that creativity can happen. And that's the way of Rahu, that's the purpose of Rahu, that's what it is supposed to do. It's that point in the birth chart which makes us move into evolution that makes us push the boundary, that makes us become fascinated, have compulsions, things that we don't understand, and we fail there. So our attention, when we fail, there's a pain point, so attention moves to that pain point, and then it seeks to evolve. We really want to fix this thing that pains us, right? Or sometimes it's not just the pain point, sometimes because it sounds a bit tough or negative, right? Sometimes not only pain point in that sense. Sometimes it's a simple fascination by that aspect of reality. So now the ways of Saptagrahas. So through that, what are the ways of Saptagrahas when put in context of Rahu? So now as Rahu expands, our horizons by making our luminaries, that is sun and moon, expand into the unknown, right? So Rahu is also expanding. How? By making the luminaries, sun and moon, also expand into the unknown. It's the same. It's created by the entanglement of the orbit of the moon around Earth, and the orbit of the sun, the ecliptic, the orbit of the sun around Earth. The 2 points, the 2 disks collide in a way and create these 2 points of entanglement, Rahu and Ketu. So we require assistance of all the embodied grahas as we expand into the unknown. Now Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus and Saturn are the 7 embodied grahas, which I'm here referring to as the Saptagrahas. The Navagrahas, the 9 grahas, include Rahu and Ketu in the scheme, but here, since we are learning about Rahu itself and also Ketu in a sense, we are referring to them as the Saptagrahas. Now within this scheme, Sun is the Atman. As we know, Sun's function is its consciousness itself. Atman means that which remains. So if everything dissolves, the essence which experiences remains in its nascent, luminous, loving and courageous form. It is the I amness. Now moon is the Manas. Manas can be translated to imagination. It created images by using the light of the sun. So it creates images by using the light of the sun and connects us to the physical embodied experience with all the other grahas. It is a satellite that tunes into the frequency of all the grahas and always works in unison with the sun. As long as one is having a physical experience on earth, it is always working in unison with moon, with sun. So sun and moon are always, cannot be spoken of separately. So people speak of sun sign. You cannot speak of the sun sign without the moon sign, and the moon sign without the sun sign. The masculine and feminine aspect of reality are always functioning together, especially on earth as we know it. Now we see sun is essentially the sense, moon is essentially a sense of I am this or that. So I am is sun and I am Sachin is moon, and they work together to create this experience of reality. If we speak of I am, it can only be spoken of in the sense of first I was this. So here we get into a little bit of let's say existential philosophy in some sense, but I don't want to complicate the matters too much. Simply put, sun is a confidence to be, and moon is who we are, like how we behave in the world, of using that confidence of the soul, using that courage. I think the 26 attributes as given in Bhagavad Gita, the 26 attributes of the soul, right? And then there are these attributes of the moon given by Parashara, and we can use the two to know like how dynamically our consciousness functions. Now Rahu exists because the entanglement of the soul and the ego, right? So ego is moon, or ego is the moon, and sun is the soul of things, which is this light being reflected around us. Now how we interpret this light is moon, right? And how we then connect to this reality is how the satellite moon is tuning into the 5 planets, right? So sun throws the light on the moon then as a satellite tunes into the 5 elemental grahas. And Rahu and Ketu are the evolutionary path of consciousness. Ketu is the vasanas, the karmic residue, which gives us information to project another reality, and that's why Ketu is really, really fundamental to maybe even Sun. And then Rahu is how we expand the path that all of this takes. So now we see Mars provides with the subtle strength required to do anything. It is the activating, invigorating energy which we psychologically experience as courage, boldness, self-control, willpower. So Mars provides Rahu with courage as it moves into deep space. So as Rahu, Sun has a vision that I want to create a life in, let's say, in a monastery, right? And then Moon is like, I need a monastery which feels, which has a strict teacher. I want a Zen monastery, right? And then maybe not necessarily Zen is not necessarily a strict teacher. That's a funny association that I have. But then Moon will tune into Mercury. Okay, so how much do you read? So when you're looking for a monastery, you'll be like, okay, does this teacher ask us to read a lot? And then Moon is tuning into Mercury. Do you have the capacity to read a lot? And then Moon tunes into Venus. And while all of this is happening, it is Rahu and Ketu which are being fulfilled. So we are learning an evolutionary developmental goal of Rahu in all of this process. And we are completing a goal of Ketu, and Ketu is seeking this final liberation and perfection by essentially absorbing everything back as it is perfected, and eventually realizing the Sun and the higher purposes of yoga, which are beyond Sun and Moon. So now Mercury is the cognitive capacities which allow us to read, write, intellectualize, categorize. Essentially, Mercury externalizes the internal world of Sun and Moon. So Rishi Parashara gives Mercury consciousness spoken in the nature or form of the grahas, and Rahu materializes newer realities for itself through the skills and capacities of Mercury. So it is the capacity to discriminate and differentiate. So as one, let's take the same example, as one moves to that monastery, it will be Mercury which will make friends, which will have a schedule and know how to manage their time, and which will know if they need to learn the language in which they're translating the sutras from, or whichever country they're practicing Zen Buddhism in, or simply Zen Dhyana in. So that Sun has a vision, it projects it into Moon, Moon tunes into the 5 grahas, and they fulfill the evolutionary path of Rahu and Ketu. That's an astrological scheme, how we can explain essentially everything in life. Then Jupiter is the inner wisdom mechanism, or the right understanding that the Zen Dhyana teachers of a higher order profess to their beloved disciples. So Jupiter plays a very, very important role. It is, in a sense, the inner voice. It is the inner wisdom mechanism. It does not come from information, data. It doesn't come from the knowledge it is absorbed externally. That's Mercury. Mercury reads a lot and understands things in that way. Jupiter is an insight which comes after reading many books. Maybe it's when we make the information into knowledge and then more like wisdom, right? So when it enters the heart, what they say, what they call when the teaching enters the heart of the disciple. So then the disciple becomes the teaching. That's Jupiter's job. It is this deep wisdom, deep sense of discernment, telling the difference between telling truth from false. So in the deep dark space exploration journey of Rahu, it is Jupiter's joy, goodness, wisdom and grace which guides it. So when Rahu is sort of exploring unknown territories where anything can go wrong and things actually do go wrong, it is Jupiter's positive attitude, self-encouragement, or seeing the bright side, optimism, goodness, having the wisdom to sort of transcend the state of self-absorption, and the grace, the luck that you sort of bypass an obstacle sometimes. All of that comes from Jupiter. Now, Venus is one's capacity to be nourished, rejuvenated, and re-established in oneself in such a manner that one can go on for a longer duration without getting burnt out. Right? So Venus is, and the thing is, let's take an example of a flower. So if a flower is, if you take the smell of a flower every day, but you don't water it, if you don't take care of it, you don't talk to it, it wilts. And that's the thing. We have to create a win-win situation for Venus to work, because otherwise the resources on either end will eventually dry up. So Venus is all about this watery, this wetness. It cannot dry up, and for that we need to know how to create a win-win situation in life, how to create a trade that does not run a deficit. Relationships with other beings and even things can make life a heaven or hell on earth. It is not about what we desire. All human desires are fundamentally the same. The desire for connection, and you know how it goes. It is about how we desire and how we fulfill those desires, which makes life a pleasurable Venusian heaven or a rough hell. As Rahu explores deep space, it is Venusian diplomacy, softness, ease and nourishment, and creating win-win situation that makes the exploration a worthwhile pursuit to begin with. So if one is going into some kind of Rahu evolution, but if the cost of evolution is too high, if how they are choosing to evolve, the price that they're paying is too high, even after they seem to be evolved, they would have paid too much to get to that point, and at that point they haven't truly evolved, right? So all of these grahas are also evolving at the same time. While Rahu is sort of taking one to like an extreme, it's forcing one to go into the unknown waters. All the grahas are re-establishing, relearning themselves, are also evolving. That is the purpose of Rahu. So because it's the nodes of the moon, right? So when moon is tuning and absorbing and tuning into the needs of every graha, the nodes of the moon are what are essentially doing the churning, essentially what the planets are like grinding against, getting the friction off of to evolve as well, right? So it's a synergy, it's a symbiotic relationship. Nothing is working in isolation in astrology, and that's why it becomes so complex so quickly, and that's why people seek simplicity from astrological thought, which is, I feel, impossible with astrology if you want to do it properly. Now finally, Saturn, the graha of resilience and resistance, is what determines how far out can we actually make it into this deep space exploration of Rahu. It is a capacity to bear the inevitable traumas and burdens of life and keep moving on without getting stuck. So a strong Saturn, and I think there's an old idea from, I think, Satya Jataka, where it says Ketu behaves like Mars and Rahu behaves like Saturn. It's essentially the idea that Saturn is our capacity to bear traumas, and Rahu creates a lot of disturbance because we are dealing with things that we haven't dealt with before. We don't really understand that aspect of life. It's like we're still interning in those areas of life, let's call it that. And as we are interns in that area, we tend to make mistakes. And when we make a mistake as an intern and we feel embarrassed, do we take that embarrassment to the heart and stop doing work, like stop progressing in our work? Or do we shrug it off, deal with it, cope with it through humor or self-compassion or something like that, and move forward? It depends on the health of our Saturn. Saturn is our capacity to bear traumas and how we persevere through life. Now finally we come to Rahu conjunct the Saptagrahas. So I hope all of that we've covered up till now is clear. If not, you can pause the video and go back into the slides, and if you have any questions, please feel free to comment below, and I'll do my best to reply and explain as much as possible, as long as the questions are sensible.